All right, welcome to the Q&A, everyone. My name's Dayan. I'm going to be curating the call today and getting as many of your questions answered as possible. Thanks for joining live on this one. If you're not seeing any video, that's because I'm currently speaking, so you should be seeing the Recording Revolution logo. And when Jacquire's speaking, you'll see Jacquire. If we could just test that again, Jacquire, if you could just say ABC real quick.
ABC. Trying to get a little bit better light going.
Great. If you could just leave in the chat if you saw Jacquire when he said ABC.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, okay, great. It's working awesome. I think we should get started straight away so that we can answer as many questions as possible. The way this will work is for the first half of the Q&A, we're going to answer the pre-sent in questions, because I have a feeling that some of Jacquire's answers may answer multiple questions at once. And then in the second half of this call, we're gonna take some live questions. When you want to ask a question, you should be able to see a Q&A button. Does everyone see that? So there's two buttons. One's called chat and one's called Q&A. Does everyone see the Q&A button? Okay, great. So if you click that and submit your question there, we'll know that it's a question. Because otherwise, if it goes in the chat, we might miss it because you can use the chat to be discussing other things with each other. So use the Q&A button to ask any questions, and then we'll be answering the live questions in the second half of the call. So let's start off the call with some of the pre-sent in questions. So Ewan asks a really great question. Ewan asks, when Jacquire makes subtle compression and EQ changes in the mix, he rarely hears the difference. Is that just a matter of training your ears? And if so, how can he know that he's making the right compression and EQ tweaks that add up to the radically improved end result? Because he can hear the difference in the final mixes.
Okay, that's a very good question. And before I answer the question, I'd just like to thank everyone for, I'm very grateful for your participation and the opportunity to share this with you and being here with me this morning, today, wherever you are. So I very, very much appreciate it. And I'd like to, continue to share and make this a valuable period of time with you. Ewing's question. Yes, it does take it does really take training your ear, and that's you're right in that. The ways that I would suggest that you need to start to think about things and listen. Obviously, when you're listening to whatever it is that you're applying compression and EQ to, that is the primary thing you're listening to, because that's what you're having the most impact on. But what you also need to do is you need to listen to how it affects other things. Let's say, for instance, I'm EQing and compressing a bass instrument. I also need to pay attention to the way that it partners with and accentuates maybe what a kick drum or the rhythm elements are doing, because those things are very tied together. You were talking about low end with a bass. So you need to listen to the other things surrounding it and the way that it affects those. Because when you make certain adjustments, if you're taking frequencies away, let's say from the bass, it should free up those frequencies to be available for other things to speak, perhaps the kick drum or whatever your rhythm set, whatever your programming or drums are doing or whatever. So it's not only just about making a flattering decision and adjustment for a particular instrument, obviously focusing on what's going to make that sound better, but do it in a way that it ties into what else is going on, and listen to those other things and evaluate the changes you're making based on the way it affects its relationship with other things. And that it goes to applying to listening to the reverb and the space and the depth of things. I know I do a lot of subtle things, because I guess at this point my ear is trained to the point where I understand the bigger picture, and when I hear that I want to make a correction on something or a change on something, enhance something, I know very specifically where that there's going to be an opportunity for that that element to be adjusted and have a little bit more clarity. Sometimes that means taking away some frequencies from the bass. We'll go back to the bass as we'll stick with the example. But sometimes it might mean that I need to change what the EQ is doing on my programmed drums or my drum kit to allow the bass to speak a little bit better. It really does come down to some experience, and I wish, my sincere hope and wish is that I can say some things and demonstrate some things to you that will reveal how to think about these things. I mean, you could copy everything I do, and I didn't really want to make this too much about specific techniques. It's, you know, that there isn't one specific way to do any one thing or EQ any one element, like a vocal or the specific type of reverb you should use. There are things that I have learned over time that fit my taste and the way that I put things together. So I do things in a similar fashion most of the time, but it's really because I understand the big picture and how I'm applying my thoughts to it. It's really a learned process. So as much as I'd love to be able to give you very specific techniques that you can use, the reality is if I were to give you those very specific techniques and you were to do exactly what I did, it may not fit. It probably won't fit the production and the music and the whole thing in a way that fully brings it to life, because you have to learn to apply your own taste and your own judgment to those situations. So as much as it is about techniques, it really is about a way of thinking. And so you've got to be able to start to listen to what it is that you're doing specifically, but then at the way that it creates a relationship with other things. You know, I haven't given you anything specific necessarily, but you have to think about the way frequencies mask other frequencies. You know, the attack and release on a compressor very much controls the tone. The attack basically is how much of the transient are you letting through? How much of the brightness are you letting through? The release is about how long the compression stays engaged. And that is tied to the rhythm of what's going on. It's also tied to the tone. I mean, something may have a lot of very bright forward tone and not have a bunch of depth and deeper tone. So if you use a slow release time, well, then the sustain and the tone in it is going to be left in compression. But if you want to try to warm something up with a little bit of compression, you might use a faster attack so that it quiets the bright transient faster. And then you want a fast release so that it's just really affecting that initial transient part of the sound where the brightness is and the forwardness is. And then by doing that, by turning that part down, you're able to bring up the tone, because the compressor is just, if it has a fast attack and a fast release, it's just quieting the transient, and you'll be able to turn the overall up, which will turn the tone up in the lower end. So those are just some ways of thinking, I guess. Really thinking about the way frequencies are shared in a production, the way things are layered, and making sure that you leave spaces and its relationships. You know, sometimes we go back one more time to the bass example. If I'm not really hearing enough of a sort of a warm bottom end from the bass, and maybe it's because my drums have too much and I need to clear out a little bit of space in the drums so that the bass can speak a little bit better. I hope some of that helps. And it really is about a process of thinking.
Awesome answer. That's one that definitely helped a lot of people, because I think a lot of people asked the same question on that one too. So thanks for that one, Jacquire. Next question is from Rob. Rob asks, as the singer, songwriter, engineer, and producer, I find it difficult to have a 10,000-foot view of the song, especially when it comes to vocals, as I don't like the sound of my voice, even when others say it's good. Any tips on separating the vocal performer from the producer when you are playing both roles yourself?
Let me think through it. I mean, that's a very good question. And, let me share something with you. Even before I answer it, my experience here today around this Q&A is I'm working on a couple productions. And one of them in particular, it's kind of been going on for a little while. Producing, participating in the engineering, and now in the mixing stage and trying to get mixing, and there's a lot of people involved. There's the artist, the management, the label, and there's all these different voices that have come into play over the past few weeks, and I've lost a little bit of perspective. It just happens when you spend a lot of time with something, and you start to think with other people's words and other people's thoughts. You can lose your way. To answer the question, so I mean, listen, I've made hundreds of records and I've mixed thousands of songs, but it's just a very natural and human thing to get a little bit lost. Space, taking a break from things. I've tried to give myself a little bit of space. I'm up against deadlines, so just trying to balance those things. But to answer the question specifically in terms of vocals, try and treat yourself like the two individuals. And what I mean by that is don't examine your performance too much in the moment. Don't be too much of the producer while you're trying to be the performer and the artist. Be the engineer first. Be the engineer, and focus on the engineering. Sing a little bit. Make sure you have a good signal and you're getting a good recording. And then once as the engineer, okay, I've done my job. I can now switch over to being the artist and the performer. Go in and sing, and don't really think too much about the technical stuff. Don't think too much about the pitch or the just get in there and perform and just feel the song and just try to give the energy that that you're feeling to it, and don't over-examine it in the moment. Then save it and put it away for an hour, 2 days, something. It just sort of depends on your life schedule and what sort of timeline you're on, but just give it a little bit of time, and then go back as the producer and make a comp of it, see what you have, and then sort of just take that step back and then re-engage yourself, see what you have, and then just make an evaluation. Maybe you did a great job and you have 90% of it and you really just have to fix a few things, and then you can just so then you as the producer, you've made those decisions, and then you go back and you get yourself set up as the engineer, and then you switch over to being the performer, and you just pay attention to delivering those few things. Hopefully that helps. It's really difficult to do it all yourself, and I struggle with it. Sometimes it's easier than others. There's a lot of different things that can cloud it. So just try and give yourself as much separation and grace, and that's the other thing about being a good creator, and helping other people be good creators. You have to be able to evaluate yourself and give yourself the best opportunity to get a great result, and figure that out. And it takes a long time. None of this. I don't know where the majority of you are in terms of journey. If you're very new at this, or you've been at it a few years, or you're very seasoned. In a way, it doesn't really matter. We always have to be patient with ourselves to improve and learn. And even the best in the world at anything, they have to be diligent and practice and stay applied to grow and to kind of keep their skill at a certain level. A professional athlete, just because they have a contract and they play on a professional team and they play in championship games, they have to go practice every day. They have to stay tuned up and be evaluated, and just continue to grow. It's like a thing of maintenance. So and it takes a very long time. There's so much to learn and so much to do over and over and over again. So hopefully that helps.
Awesome. The next question is one quite a few people asked, which is, in the course you mix mostly in stereo. However, a lot of other courses talk about mixing in mono. What are your thoughts on that? And also, what is your general advice then for stereo imaging and panning?
Okay. I'm not really sure where, I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously there's benefit to listening in mono. I think I think maybe why that's advice. I don't think it's great advice personally. Why I think it maybe is advice is because it eliminates some variables in the image that you're, and the space that you're in, and the way you're evaluating things. But reverbs and effects and delays and polarity phase choices, they are definitely different when you collapse things to mono. I think it's a good idea to check your work in mono. I do that, but just very briefly. And I also don't do it until I'm pretty deep in the process of mixing. So it's a good tool to know that when you combine your left and right, that you're not losing too much information. It's going to change. It's going to change regardless. Stereo is not 100% mono compatible. That's just the reality, especially when we have stereo sources and we're creating stereo effects. You know, if you pan something all the way to the left, and then you have, let's say we pan a keyboard to the left and a guitar to the right, and we have the voice in the middle. Well, the voice in the middle is present in both speakers. And where you have, in a stereo image, where you have what feels like enough of the keyboard or the guitar, or enough of the keyboard, when you put it in mono, they're going to feel a little bit less than the vocal, because the vocal's in both. It's just the way it works. So it's going to change. I think it's something to make sure that it's not changing too much, and that when people do hear it in mono, in certain cases, because that does still happen in the world, that the mix is still well represented. My thoughts on stereo placement: your voice, your leading melodic parts, especially when the voice is not present, perhaps a solo, whatever the main focus is, melodically, should be in the middle. And then you know, parts and things that accentuate sections and play counterpoint melodies, or you know, or melodies that work together. I like to pan instrumentation far, you know, hard left and hard right. Like in the example of the keyboard and the guitar, your rhythm elements should mostly be in the middle. I believe your foundational stuff certainly, you know, I'm going to say kick and snare and bass, and I'm not talking just about rock music. It's like those, I'm using those as loose terms. Whatever comprises those elements of a production, and it's not to say that every production needs a bass or a kick drum. It depends on the style of music, but those focal things, the primary rhythm elements and the primary melodic voice that's leading things, either the vocal or a solo instrument, should primarily be in the middle, with stereo effects, and then you place your instrumentation to the sides, and I like to do it very wide for the instrumentation. So that, and by wide I mean, you know, the keyboard and the guitar, so that there's the in-between areas where I can place effects. Like if I want to put like a little bit of delay on the keyboard, I won't pan it hard. I'll pan it about medium width, so that the keyboard sort of feels like it's playing in the stereo field, but its primary voice is off to one side, and it's tied to the rest of stuff. And that delay, you know, sort of creates a rhythmic interest and glue with all the other elements that are going on. And you know, I've sort of stated this in the course probably more than once, but I prefer to record elements more in mono, so that I can have very specific placements and then kind of create a full stereo picture. I feel like if everything is in stereo, then really it's just, there's nothing that's really defined. It's all just sort of a soft mono that doesn't really give anything a particular place to live. And I also think about rhythmic elements, like the rhythms that things are playing, making sure that I'm not putting very similar rhythms over top of one another unless they're really meant to perform as a unit, so that the little bit of difference in the way that those rhythms are working. I mean, they both could be working on a triplet feel, but because they have a different tonal texture and just a different sonic response, it creates a little bit of interplay and width and interest. And so you're also thinking about frequency bands. If you've got a hi-hat that's going on one side and then there's a shaker going on, I don't want to put them on top of each other. I'll kind of, if they're playing a similar sort of eighth note feel, I'll pan them opposite one another to provide a little bit of space.
Awesome. The next question is, how should someone go about mastering their own record? Are there any plugins or tools that you recommend, and any general thoughts on that?
My general thoughts are that mastering, yeah, I mean, sometimes I have to master my own songs. Sometimes you kind of have to faux master them to be able to present them to a client, so that they don't, so they're not second guessing what the work by it simply being quieter than what a commercial release would be. Fortunately, a lot of delivery now is to streaming platforms, and it's very easy to get the level to that, you know, -14, -12 LUFS. And I'm not going to explain LUFS. That's just a metering standard that you should study and understand what sort of your general target is. But for me, and it kind of ties back to the sort of our first, or well, an earlier question about, was the second question, I guess, wearing all these hats, how do you manage it? And mastering, I think, is the one area where, because it's sort of the last step, and there's so many different delivery formats, and there's a lot of expertise that's not as general knowledge as what we're talking about. I think it's probably good to hire someone to help you with that. If you have to do it yourself, you know, there's lots of different, I mean, Isotope makes a couple good mastering products. Sometimes I'll use a plugin like the Oxford Inflator, or L3, or the PSP Vintage Warmer, just to give me that extra bit of level, as a sort of a temporary thing. I've had to master some things in the past. It's kind of always a different process. Mastering things for myself is something I'm never really too excited to do. I've mastered stuff for other people, and that's a bit easier, because at that point, you know, it's like I haven't had any experience with it, so really, and so I'm able to sort of evaluate it very objectively and get it to a desired level, and you know, understand what the delivery is, and make sure that my file meets those standards. Yeah, I really think even if you're doing this on a budget, you've spent less than $100 a song to get to where you have a finished product. It really is valuable if you really care about delivering the very best, especially mastering. It's good to hire someone that does it day in and day out. And there's plenty of affordable options. And you know, because mastering really can make or break a product and the end result. So yeah, I don't think that there isn't any one. I mean, pretty much every plugin manufacturer has something that you can use for mastering. Some market them for mastering, but you just kind of have to try some things out. I don't really have, I think iZotope probably offers some of the best solutions. So I'll leave it at that. And also Lander, which is an online service, I think, there's some things that I don't love about that, but I think it's pretty affordable. So it might be worthwhile spending just that little bit of money, just very small amount of money, just to see what that result would yield, and give yourself something as a comparable that you could try and master yourself and learn a little bit about the process. I won't say it's a dark art, but there's a lot of things that are not very standard in audio that get done in mastering, because there's clipping and certain different ways that mastering engineers over time have modified gear and built very specific gear to master things, to get things loud and exciting in the digital realm without totally losing all the feel of the dynamics. So I guess that's probably my best answer. Sorry if it's a bit wandering, but there you go.
That was great. A lot of amazing suggestions there too. Kind of related to that, Martin's question is, if someone is going to use an external mixer / mastering engineer, how should they go about finding and approaching an experienced mixing engineer, someone of your level of experience? How much should they then expect to pay for something like that? And does that differ with mastering engineers?
Okay. Let's see. How do you approach someone? Well, first you need to determine who you want to approach. So you don't necessarily have to find someone that does a lot of work in your particular genre. It's just, you can look across the recordings you like and mixes you like, and sort of see if you can find someone that you can identify someone across maybe a few of them that you like. And I guess, that's sort of, talking about someone that's maybe more at the top end, I guess, that's been doing things. But I guess just do a little bit of research based on your taste and what you're trying to do. The internet is such and Wikipedia is such a valuable tool. And I know there's platforms, I can't think of what they are off the top of my head. I know there's platforms out there where you can source a selection of mixing engineers and producers where they have a discography, a body of work. You can listen to some of their work. So you first need to do a little bit of work to identify someone in some way, or if you know someone that has done something independently and you like the result that they got, ask them who they use. Ask for recommendations from your peers, and then once you get some recommendations, the points of contact are different. Hopefully, if you're looking for someone that's more established, there's usually a way to figure out how to reach somebody on a social media platform, through a management contact, through maybe a record label they've worked with, or another artist contact. If I've mixed a record for another artist, and you can contact that artist's manager to ask them how to get in touch with me. There's just a lot of ways. You just have to do the legwork to get there once you've identified somebody. And then, in terms of cost, someone that's working that has a level of experience and expertise that you're going to want to hire. Some people mix songs as cheap as a few $100s per song. I think, I'm not saying that those people aren't great mixers, because many of them are. But you're going to have to. At a minimum, I think that's probably the money you're looking at spending. I would say someone that's very experienced, a bit in demand, you're looking at closer to $1,000 a song. And then when you talk about someone like myself or, other, others that I guess, I don't like talking about myself in this way, but, if you're looking at the upper tier, the A-list, you're talking about several $1,000s or more per song, and also, a royalty. Now, that's not to say, I would say that most mixers at my level are charging anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000, and sometimes more per song, and also a royalty, one royalty point. Now, that's not to say that that myself and others don't have independent rates. I know I do, and I know some of my peers do. If we really love the music and really love the opportunity and want to partner with you, then we can creatively figure out a way to do it. It's just time is our most valuable resource, and we have to do things that respect people's time and value, and make agreements that way. I mean, sometimes I will make something very cheaply for someone if they will give, if I am able to have a higher royalty rate, if I can start being paid from the first record they sell. And so just sort of think, if I'm going to like help save them on their budget up front, then if the record goes out there and has success, then I am sort of rewarded more than standard as they make money as well. And then I guess the last component of it is mastering. I think it's a very similar process of identification, and also and finding that person, being able to book that person. I have been using, for instance, I've been using Emily Lazar on the last few records. I mean, Emily's very busy. She's expensive because she's on the upper tier. And she's very, very good. She's done a ton of stuff. I mean, you can go to her website and send an email asking for rates and availability. And if you can wait for the availability, you can afford it, I'm sure they'll work you in. But there's lots of independent mastering engineers out there. And if depending on where your level, I've kind of been talking about it like if someone's a little bit more of a beginner. But if you've got a little bit of something going on, and you have a little bit of financial resource, there are many times there are mixers out there that are willing to do a free mix, to kind of do a mix shootout. I don't particularly like to participate in those, because I just don't I don't like to audition for things. And that, I don't mean that to sound egotistical, but I just don't really, I value my time in a way where I'm not, if someone wants to work with me and we can have a conversation and we can come to an agreement about what the timing and cost of that will be, then that's what we'll do. I don't have too much time or interest in working for free. I already spent 15, 20 years of my career working very inexpensively to be at a place where, I can ask for a certain amount of compensation, and you either know you want me to try and help you or not. So hopefully that helps.
That was a lot of knowledge. Thank you so much. The next question is, in the course, you talked about how one of the issues you face as a producer is when an artist comes to you with a more or less complete sounding demo, because that leaves little creative room for you to work as a producer. Now, as an artist, if the artist wants to develop their own sound, they want to experiment, they want to try learning arrangements, and they also want to work with an outside producer, how do they balance those two sides?
Good question. Well, I think where it becomes, well, let me just start with my personal experience, give you a little insight of why I have said some of the things I've said. It's in that, it's called demoitis, that people just, usually a demo, and the time it takes, like the time that's spent writing and demoing a song and the sort of the life it has in the process of it typically is longer. You might have written a song 6 months ago and demoed it in a couple months following that, and so you've got 4 months where you've been listening to the same demo and sharing it, and then it's just like, okay, it's time to make the record. Okay, well maybe you spend a couple weeks working on that song to turn it into a record. Well, it's going to be different. It's going to be different because you're redoing things. You're trying to improve. You've engaged with someone, or you're to produce you, or you're producing yourself, and you're going to redo it, or you're going to expand on it. You're going to try and improve it. It's going to change it. And sometimes it's very hard for people to have listened to something that was a more fully realized demo, and they just become very attached to the way that it sounds. I mean, just think about a song that maybe you've listened to for 10 years, that's a record by your favorite artist, and then someone covers it. Well, you may love the cover, but you may not. Oftentimes, I mean, sometimes I feel this way, like when if I've listened to a song for years and years and years, and then I hear a live version, it's like, maybe the live version doesn't quite do it, for me. And it's because it's different than, even though it's the same artist and they're playing the same parts and it's meant to be the same thing, it's different because it's not what I'm used to. And so unless the people involved, the artist and the people that are involved that bring me the record are really able to fully embrace letting the demo go, letting all that stuff go, being a document of the idea, and that we're going to try to expand on it and improve upon it, give it a different, to try and elevate it. Now, I'm not saying that everything we touch, we elevate. Sometimes it's hard to beat a demo because, in a demo, you're trying to get an idea down. You're not so worried about it being the forever version of it because it's the demo. It's just a temporary thing. That changes the perspective of performance and the way people feel a little bit more uninhibited to kind of give themselves to just kind of get the idea down. Magic happens in that. And, unless you can have someone that can sort of set that aside and use it just as like a reference for what the record will become. And you get stuck in this situation where you've got 1 foot in one place and 1 foot in the other. And that sometimes that doubt and that second guessing and kind of keep referring to the demo. It's just like for a sound or a part or a melody, sometimes harmony parts are wrong in demos, so there's bad notes in there, and that's okay. It's not like everything has to be perfect. Ultimately, it just needs to feel good. But when you start making a record, hopefully you're adding clarity and depth and new space, and you're kind of growing the sound up. And when you do that, sometimes you're able to see the parts of it more clearly, and it's realized. I mean, this happened 2 days ago. We were doing the harmony parts, and we referred to the demo, and it's like, yeah, they're wrong on the demo. It's like wrong in terms of like what we're deciding to do now. They work, but they don't sound as flattering perhaps as the decisions we're making now. And we referred to the demo, and we just had to decide, well, like, are we going to do that, or are we going to do this? And if we're going to do this, then we have to forget about that. Or if that's what we're going to do, then we're just going to do that in the now. So I don't know. I hope some of that is helping. But it's perspective, it's attitude, it's embracing the now. Because if you can't get away from the demo, then it's almost not worth doing the record. And it's a little bit deflating as a creator sometimes, as a producer creator, to always trying to be beating a demo, if that's the way that's the way it feels. I mean, I am trying to beat the demo. I'm trying to make a record that feels more fully realized than the demo. But if the demo is always a measuring stick for the outcome as opposed to being the guide and the jumping off point, then it becomes a frustrating process. Dan, have I answered the question fully? It feels like there's an element of the question that I haven't touched on.
No, I think you've answered it.
Okay, okay.
The next question is from Chris, and I'm going to combine it with another question that we got. So Chris is working on a very large mix of electronic drums and a live kit. Could you speak more about getting a cohesive sound between the two? Are you only using certain mics from the live recording to make it gel with electronic drums? And then related to that,
go ahead.
Do you think it's possible to make a good sounding record using only a software like EZDrummer?
I'll answer the second question first.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it should be. If you pair it, you know, if it's the right rhythm, and you've paired it with performances and other things that make it feel important and intentional as part of the production, then absolutely. It's not. It has nothing to do with where it came from. It's how it's embraced and incorporated into the idea and execution of the song, of the record. So absolutely, I believe it's possible. Is it the answer? Is it always going to be the answer? Probably not. It's because you're using something that's meant to serve a lot of different things, and it's not truly unique and special in that a lot of other people are using it. So while sometimes that can be a benefit, because like, let's say the 808, like an 808 drum machine is a part of the definition of the sound of hip hop. A 909 is part of the sound of, house and dance music. So it can signify something relating and being related to a genre, but then it's also, do you want to sound like everybody else? To reiterate, I think it's totally possible. It just has to be used intentionally and in a way that you're adding stuff to it that embraces that decision and makes it feel important. Is it possible? Okay, so let's go to the first part of the question. Is it possible to combine program drums and played drums? Yeah, I do it all the time. I believe it's possible. You have to decide how they're serving each other. If the programmed drum elements are meant to be the forward component and texture of that drum relationship, then yeah, you have to balance your live kit differently, and you also might need to record it differently. You're not going to want the close kick drum sound and the close snare drum sound to be the loudest part of that element of the production, being the drum kit, because you probably already have a very forward and forceful kick and snare. And so what becomes more important is the microphones that are a little bit farther away, that give you a sense of space, maybe the room that you're in, or it's more about the softer presentation of the kick and the snare. Because if you have the kick drum of the programming and the live kit kind of equal volume, well, then they've got to be very, very tight with each other. They got to be very married and cohesive. So a lot of times, if I'm balancing a live drum kit to a program drum kit, and the program drums are the most important things, I'll do something like the kick drum's in there, but just a little, and I mean in the drum kit, it's in there, but just a little bit. It's turned way down, maybe 5 to 10 dB from where I might normally put it. It helps stabilize and make the drum kit sound full, but it also allows me to balance it in a way where those little timing inconsistencies just give it a depth as opposed to making it sound bad. Other way around. It also depends on how you justify things. If if the program drums are meant to be the loudest and you've got a drum kit like I'm talking about, and you balance it in the way that I'm suggesting, well, the timing doesn't necessarily need to be as tight. It can flam a little bit. It can move a little bit. It'll give it a nice depth of feeling. And plus the dynamic of actually someone playing, it's not as consistent as the programming. And that kind of, you know, depending on how loud the hi-hat is being hit, that dynamic energy and that change adds a lot of depth. Or, you know, same with the snare drum. And, you know, snare drum is a little bit more forgiving, especially in a room type of perspective of being a little bit flammy, you know, because that's why we love claps and tambourines and snaps so much paired with program drums. But it's really when you get down to the bottom end where if things are flamming, it just doesn't feel as flattering. So feel like, you know, if you've got, you know, you might have to edit your drums so that they feel a little bit more in time. Doesn't necessarily have to be in perfect timing with the programming if you're balancing it the way I'm suggesting, but it's got to be kind of close. Now, if the programming is meant to support the drums, I've talked a lot about the drums supporting the program. If the programming is supporting the drums, you've got to make if you've decided that the feel of the drums is appropriate, and this is not putting it on a grid, it's just like, because sometimes maybe the snare is laying back, and, you know, accented kicks, it's like a ba-boom, boom, ba-boom, boom. If, you know, it's just like, that may not fall exactly on the grid. You've got to just, it's got to be in a place that feels good. And if the drum kit, the play drum kit is the boss, well, then you've got to take your programming and you've got to adjust it to the feel of the drum kit. There's several ways to do that. You know, in Pro Tools, you can use Beat Detective to extract, and I know you can do the similar thing in Logic and Ableton. You can extract a groove and then quantize your program drums to it, so that they're very married, and they fit together with each other really well. You just sort of have to make decisions based on you know, what the production is. I mean, for instance, long time ago, I mixed something where the drum kit was recorded not so great. The overheads were they were usable. The kick and snare sounded terrible. So what I did is I didn't change the drum performance. I didn't edit the drum performance, but I replaced the mic'd kick and snare with samples and turned the close mics off for those elements and balanced the samples loud where I would have normally balanced the kick and snare, and I just brought the overheads. I filtered off some of the low end, so I wasn't having the flamming feeling in the low end, because, you know, even though I was putting the kick and snare exactly where it had been played, you know, they're not exactly the same thing, so you kind of have to be careful sometimes with low end and just kind of balance the overheads in, and it felt real because it was performance. But I replaced the kick and snare with a sample. Hopefully some of that helps.
Awesome. Next question is from Sven. What are your thoughts on creating a big and full sounding arrangement when you have a lot of things going on, lots of instruments, etc.? How do you get it to not be overwhelming and messy? And how do you fill up the frequency spectrum in a nice way?
Yeah. Well, if you really feel like you've got to have, I mean, having space is more intentional and more powerful. Now, I'm not saying that I don't layer things up a lot, because sometimes I do, if that's the right call. But if something is only just adding, you know, if it's adding, you know, 10 or 15% or less to the overall sound, like maybe like a keyboard texture that's playing what something else is doing that's meant to be more forward sounding and louder, you have to decide, do I really need this? Do I really need this element? Turn it off. And if you do need it, make sure that this is where you've got to then begin to be really, you got to carve things up with a lot of EQ. You've got to use some high pass and low pass filtering. You've got to, let's say you've got that keyboard part that's supporting, like let's say I have a synthesizer part that's supporting what a piano melody is doing. I want that synthesizer in there to kind of give the piano like a texture that it wouldn't normally have. But do I need 300 cycles and under on the synthesizer part to really bring about the feeling of that texture for the piano? Because it might be likely that that synthesizer has some lower frequency content, and while it might sound good with paired with only the piano, if you're just listening to those two elements, if you've got all that low end in there that's not really necessary for the job that you want it to do, well, then those frequencies are going to probably mask other things that need to speak better in that range. So you've got to like chop all that stuff off. You know, high end is kind of the same way. You know, room mics for drums and like if there's a lot of washy cymbals, I mean, that's primarily what your overhead should be. So in the room mics, you might have to dump off a lot of the high end. You've really got to, when you have a lot of elements like that and you're trying to layer things and trying to find all those little pockets, I mean, you've got to make sure that something's going to fit in a little window and that it speaks just very specifically. That can be difficult to do to get it right, because you've got to pay attention to a lot of things. So first of all, you need to decide how necessary all that stuff is, and how it is complementary. Because honestly, you're not going to have, I mean, you might have 100 tracks that make up 50 on average. Let's say if you have 100 tracks, let's say it's 50 parts. Do you really need 50 parts? I mean, a great song should be able to be played with one instrument and one voice. Now, I'm not saying that simple is always best, but if something is intentional and it's built on a strong song, then you shouldn't need all the bells and whistles. And so you just really have to be decisive and judicious about all the elements. Turn stuff off. I mean, honestly, if it's contributing 5 or 10% to the overall sound, you're probably better off without it, because the amount of effort that you're going to have to make to keep it in there to contribute is more than its value most of the time. I'm not saying 100% of the time. Turning some drum mics off sometimes you don't necessarily need to record all the drum microphones that someone recorded that you recorded yourself. And also, you know, really, it goes back to some of what I was talking about earlier about panning, not having too many things in stereo. Like if you've got those 100 tracks and they're all in stereo, well, you're gonna have a very difficult time placing that stuff. If you need both sides of a stereo track to complete the sound, well, sometimes I pan them in the same place over top of each other. Sometimes I'll listen to the left and right independently and decide that I don't need one side, and I'll just get rid of like, I like the right side. It's got its voice the way I need it to be. So I'll get rid of the left side and only use the right side. Just kind of simplifying things. Gosh, I hope I'm answering these questions well. It's just make sure it's important, and you're gonna have to do a lot of extra work to make it all fit together and make sure that things stay out of the way of each other. It goes back to the very first question of like, well, how do you hear the decisions you're making? How do you hear the EQ and compression corrections that I've been making in the videos, and fully understand it? Well, you have to understand its place, the element's place in the mix, and how it relates to other things. Everything. It's a relationship. It's a you know, that's why a chef tastes the food as they're making it, because they need to know. It's like, well, do I need more salt, or you know, how do I make this more savory, or does it need some sweet? Does it need acid? You know, it's just kind of you know, the salt brings out the flavors in other things, but you have to use the right amount of salt, and it's experimentation, and the amount of salt you use in different dishes is not the same every time. You just don't throw the same amount of salt in everything you cook and get a great result. Yeah, I hope that helps.
That was an awesome answer, super helpful. Next question is from Philip, and his general question is, how do you approach the situation where the artist doesn't want to work to a click track? Do you have any tips for that? maybe they want to create their own groove tracks to record to.
Sure. Your number one job as a producer is make the artist comfortable. If you can't make the artist comfortable, well, then, you know, you're going to have a hard time getting, the best from them. Yeah, I mean, sometimes, I mean, click is not necessary. It makes our job easier sometimes in some ways, and certain music is meant to feel more metronomic than others. If it's performed music, then you don't really need it. You shouldn't have to have a quick drum. Sometimes if there is a section where there isn't someone keeping rhythm, well then sometimes you have to have like a played click track. Somebody, you know, maybe you need a shaker. The other day we were recording acoustic guitar for a whole song, and there were sections that didn't have drums in them. But to be able to get the acoustic guitar performance in, I made a playlist that had the program drum pattern all the way through the whole song, so that it was easier to play to. And then once we got the performance for the acoustic guitar, then I went back to the other playlist that had it arranged the way I wanted it, where there wasn't drums in the first chorus. Sometimes making a loop ahead of time that feels like the song that you can loop over and over again, like a 4-bar shaker part, that's just played to the feel of the song. If it can loop and someone can perform to it and it feel good and feel very natural, that's an acceptable way to do it. It's always good to have, if you're not going to have a click track, put a count in at the top of the song, have somebody count it off, you know, whoever's starting the song off, put a count in there so that someone knows the tempo and when to come in at the top of the song. One of the biggest records I'm known for is Kings of Leon, Only by the Night. We didn't use a click track, and we cut different takes together. You know, if you can monitor the tempo at which everyone's playing and it's relatively the same take after take, it's okay. In that situation, sections speed up and slow down a little bit. As long as everyone's playing together and it feels good, then it is good. And if you have, the thing is if there isn't a click and you have something recorded, like an acoustic guitar or a drum performance, well, everybody else that records to it should be able to, it's just like playing a song together in a room. It's just like, you should be able to play together. And if you're not doing it together, and you're playing to a recording, well, if the recording that you're playing to should have enough rhythmic information, enough timing information and cues in it that you can play to it. If it doesn't, then maybe you need to temporarily make something that will. Makes me think of another thing. It's like sometimes if a singer is having a hard time singing a melody, finding the pitches, sometimes recording a piano part that they can quietly listen to as they're singing for pitch reference and timing is a good thing. It's not necessarily going to use the piano or keyboard or whatever in the final production. It's just there as an aid. And yeah, having a rhythm element. I mean, sometimes I know that like sometimes who was it that told me this? Shoot, I'm terrible with names sometimes. But a very old song. Well, not old. It's like a song from the '70s. They weren't using a click track, and it came to the bridge where the drums dropped out. So what they did once they had the performance down, the drummer went back and he took a pen and he just on the vocal mic tapped out what the rhythm was for the bridge section, so that everybody could hear it as it went by. And having the drummer do it because he has the feel and they can put it in there for them, it was you know, very helpful. You know, there's some classic rock songs that was made fun of on Saturday Night Live with Will Ferrell, you know, like it's got a cowbell all the way through it. I mean, sometimes those things were done as the metronome, and they ended up liking it. It just became part of the song and they kept it in. So hopefully I gave you a little bit of insight into it, into ways. You should just always, at the end of it, it just needs to be what serves the song and makes the artist most comfortable. record making is hard. The hard part of the work should be on the record maker, not the artist.
Awesome. Jay's asking, how do you allocate time for making a whole album if there's production involved? It seems difficult to predict how long things will take. And if it's a fixed rate, how do you deal with projects taking longer than expected? And I guess the same would apply to mixing too.
Well, none of us have a crystal ball, and I've made hundreds of records, and sometimes they go long and they go over budget. I really work not often, but they do. It happens because there's things that happen that are unexpected. Maybe someone gets sick, or you try something, you try a version of the song, and you find out that you kind of missed the mark a little bit, and you feel like re-recording it. I would say, my own personal experience, it takes 2 to 3 days to fully record a song. It can take less, it can take more. On average, I give myself 2 to 3 days, because also considering like how many elements it is, how big the band is, how many people I might have to hire in. And so I kind of know what my average is, and a song a day mixing is definitely certainly enough time. Oftentimes I mix 2 and 3 songs a day, knowing that I'm going to go back and touch them up after I get some comments. It's really about sort of learning yourself. I think that to take, even as a novice, to take more than, like, if you have an idea of what all the parts are and you have a team assembled, it really shouldn't take you longer than 4 or 5 days to record a song. Because if you're really working diligently and being decisive for those 4 or 5 days, you should absolutely get it. You should absolutely get it done. If not, then maybe you're not ready to record, or you haven't hired the right people to help you do it. Well, that's timing. I guess there was a question of budget. Well, first you have to figure out who you have to hire and how much time it's going to take, and then you have to look at what your resources are, like in terms of what your expenses are going to be. If you don't have a studio, well, what studio would you like to go to, or what's around you, and what does that cost, and then figure out the budget. And sometimes the budget dictates how much money you have. I personally always start with what is the best case scenario of a time average for the amount of songs. If I'm going to record and mix 3 songs fairly efficiently, I'm going to give myself 3 days to 2 days to record it, 1 day to mix it. And I have 10 songs, that's 30 days. Okay, well, if I have X amount of dollars, how much does that give me per day? And then can I afford what it is that I need given that equation? That's how I start. I look at the days that I think I can do it in for the number of songs. But then, sometimes the amount of money you have dictates how much time you can spend. So you have to sort of find the balancing act. I think it's always better to start with looking at time spent, and how you can apply the financial resource you have to that. You have to be very careful with your financial resources, and be sure that you're saving money where you can, and understand the cost of things before you get started, because that unforeseen things happen. Some songs go faster than others, and sometimes you have to redo things, and that costs money. And then, I have to work for free in that if I've got a budget and I get paid on a fee. I don't get paid by the hour. I am allocated a certain amount of money, and I have agreed to do the work for that certain amount of money. Most of the time, the way I've calculated it works out, but sometimes I just have to work to get the job done. And then I end up, if I spend, sometimes I spend 25% longer to complete something for the amount of money that I've been allotted. and that's just the reality of it. Sometimes I have to stop charging for studio time because there's a fee for me, and then there's an expense for the studio. I charge for the studio time because I have a very real investment and an expense here. And you know, at a certain point when the money runs out, my studio billing is the first thing that I cut. I just like, you know, like that's the reality of it. Now, if I'm paying for somebody else's studio, well, you can't really cut that expense out, but make sure you're prepared. Make sure that before you go spending money on a studio, that you have a solid plan, that you've done some rehearsing, you've worked on the songs, that you have written songs. Don't go into the studio and spend your money fooling around trying to write songs and be prepared. That is a surefire way to waste money and not achieve your allotted daily time average.
Amazing, thank you. Next question is from Peter, and his question is, what are your thoughts on the tonal balance of a mix before sending it to mastering? For example, do you leave some top end to cut from it, or do you deliver it in the tonal balance you think is suitable? Essentially preparing a mix to send to the master.
Yeah, I mean, my goal and hope is that my mix doesn't need mastering to make it finished. Really what mastering should be when you have an accomplished mix is that you're optimizing the levels for the delivery format. I mean, mastering all came about because they're trying to figure out how to get, you know, to get the sound that they're creating in the studio onto vinyl, because certain, you know, because, you know, there's certain limitations. There was, you know, that whole craft was developed by the process of taking something that was created in the studio and getting it on the format that it was intended for delivery. And that's really at the essence of it, that's what mastering is. It's like, it's taking your mix and it's optimizing it for the delivery. If you have a louder mix that is approaching like CD level and it needs to be delivered to Spotify, well, it needs to get turned down. You don't want Spotify to turn it down, because the way that they turn it down is they do it with limiting and compression. They don't just turn it down, they limit and compress it down. It's always better in the terms of a streaming service to have it delivered right around their average or just under. It's far better, because they don't, the way they turn something up is then they actually just turn it up. They just turn the file up, as opposed to having the file compressed through an audio process. So that's what I mean. Ultimately, the long answer is mastering should be about, you know, accentuating and finishing and highlighting, cleaning things up, making one mix to the next feel a little bit more consistent level wise, and making sure they have a similar sort of brightness and to the top end, tightness and tone overall, that from one to the next, when you listen to each song on a project, that you're not having to adjust the volume, and that tonally they feel the same. Now, a mastering engineer can really help refine those things and bring those things together. But my attitude and my goal is to deliver a mix that is appropriate already, and that the mastering job is just a refinement. But it has become usual and customary that people now are delivering stems to mastering engineers, and they're letting them really finish the job. And that's, well, I don't think that that's for me. That's certainly not for me. I certainly wouldn't pretend that that's not for some of you out there. But I always strive to deliver the mix finished, feeling like it should, and that the mastering is just a little bit of detail work, and really getting it right for wherever it's got to be, because the delivery for Apple Music or iTunes, you know, is different than for Apple Music, two different things. And Spotify, and if we're gonna make CDs, well, it's gonna be louder. And if it's gonna be cut to vinyl, well, the bottom end needs to be treated differently. So that's what a mastering engineer is there for, because they understand how to keep the integrity, and overall, they're gonna sound a little different on each format. It's just, especially if you're talking Spotify and vinyl. But that's the reality of it. And, you just need somebody that is an expert in having those things translate and keeping the integral part and intention of your mix intact.
Awesome. Serena is asking if you could share your thoughts on recording and mixing arrangements that have violas playing the main melodies, but counter melodies from brass instruments like trumpets and French horns. How do you make sure that the brass instruments don't overwhelm the string melodies in the recording stage so that you aren't compensating when mixing?
Well, if that's the things that you're going to pair together, a viola is a quieter, more delicate instrument. And if it's going to be paired with brass, which is very loud and bright, I would probably, in a recording scenario, I would probably record the viola with like brighter full frequency microphones. I might choose, I won't name a bunch of, like a high-end microphone, like expensive microphone I might choose would be perhaps a C12. But that's like a $12,000 or $14,000 microphone. On the lower end of things, I might choose like an AKG 414. It's less than $1,000 mic. So the character of that mic is very bright and articulate, and I can get a lot of clean gain out of it. And so it's gonna make a very forward and bright recording of the viola. The articulation is going to be there. I know that I'm going to be committing to a sound that is going to be very defined, and that I'm not going to have to do a lot of EQing to get the top end to speak against the brass. And then when it comes to the brass, I'm going to probably pick some microphones, like some ribbon mics, like like on the top end, like an RCA 44 for the trumpet, big fat ribbon that's going to be really warm sounding. Ribbon mics are very, they're not rolled off, but they're very soft in the top end. They're more about the mid-range tone and the lower stuff. And because it takes more energy, acoustic energy, to move a ribbon than it does a condenser microphone. Like a 414, and I'm gonna jump around a little bit because I want to try to explain this more thoroughly. A 414 and a C12. A C12 is a tube mic, but it has a power supply that sends, like, there's a current that is applied to the diaphragm that kind of, it makes it more receptive to acoustic energy, and that's why you can get so much detail out of them. Whereas a ribbon mic is totally a passive element, and so it takes more acoustic energy to move them to get a signal out of. So you're using a microphone that has more detail and more gain for the quieter instrument, and you're using a microphone that's darker, and it requires more acoustic energy for that ribbon mic to be moved. Now, yeah, an RCA 44s, I don't know, that's like a $5,000 mic. A Coles ribbon mic or a Royer, they're more affordable, and there's tons of like affordable ribbons out there. AEA makes some, there's Royer makes some. There's a lot. Then there's boutique brands out there that I can't think of off the top of my head. But so recording in that way, so ahead of time, using the right kind of lens to take the photograph of it, sort of starting out, committing to a sound and a relationship in the recording process. And then that way you're not having to, in mixing, you're not having to overly brighten the viola to get it to speak against the brass. And the brass already has a bit of sort of that dark, slower tone to it. And another thing about using ribbon mics, most ribbon mics listen on both sides. And so you'll get a little bit more of the acoustic space that the horns were played in, and which will help soften the sound. Horns you should record farther away from the microphones. Depending on viola is usually, depending on the perspective you want to have, usually a viola is kind of mic'd from above, at a few feet. But you know, if you want a forward sound, you can come in a little closer. There's nothing wrong with you know, miking a viola within a couple feet. You don't get as much of the warmth that way. You might get more of the resin, you know, the bowing sounds. But then you can, you know, as opposed to putting the mic right over the top of the viola, you might take it out in front a little bit so that that bright energy that's going up this way is dissipated by where the microphone is. Hopefully you can see my hands. And you're getting a little bit more of the warmth of the body over here. Yeah, just things like that. Hopefully that helps you. That's a good question.
Awesome. The next question is a more technical one, so I'm just going to read it word for word. John asks, I understand the relative phase thing, meaning things don't have to start at the exact sample level to be in relative phase. But when you have, say, 3 kick drum tracks, mics or samples, or 3 snares, which one will you consider the master for lining the others up? I've seen people on YouTube time align every drum to match the overheads exactly, but that's not my idea of a good sound.
Mine either. I'm glad you have that opinion. I think it's terrible. You should record things with just one mic if that's the way you want to hear it. You know, well, if you've got 3 snare samples, and well, hopefully you've chosen 3 snare samples that complement one another, so that you're not listening to them all at the same level. Decide which one should be the loudest. What is well, I mean, it's like, it's kind of, I guess I'm a little bit stumped in like, the primary thing is, you know, with drums is that the groove has got to be right. So if they're not, if the snares aren't all lined up, then you've got to, not only do you have to figure out which one is the best sound, but you've got to figure out where the rhythmic placement and place that exists is. So first, I mean, if I were to try to figure this out for someone, if someone sent me a session and I had 3 kicks and 3 snares and they were kind of flammy, I would just pick the ones that I thought sounded the best of each, and then edit them to find the groove that felt right. And then I would make the other kicks match the kick that I placed, and the same for the snare. And then I might rethink my choice in terms of balance. I mean, if they're all meant to be of equal volume, well, then they are. But if, you know, typically something will be louder and then it'd be blended, you know, so that those 3 things won't have the same exact volume, have a relationship. Now, if you're not trying to figure out what the groove is and someone has sent you something and you're adding samples to it, well, then you just make them conform and line up with what's going on. That's kind of, I mean, maybe I'm missing a little bit of the question, but they need to, the starts of them. Now, if you have, well, okay, so the starts of them all should be the same. If they sound different, well, then over time they're going to have a little bit of a different transient profile, and over time the way that the waveforms look is going to look different because they have different information in them. The more low end an element has in it, the longer you're going to see longer waves in it, and they will be dominant. It's not that in a digital picture, it's not that there isn't high frequency content in there. It's just visually it's kind of masked by the louder, longer, lower tones. So, you know, it's primarily about the starts being the same and the amplitude, the transients all lining up. Sometimes with kick drum samples, things that have a lot of low end, you might be able to line them all up so that they start at the same time, but then over time in the sustain, things will get out of phase with one another. You just have to pick the one that is the sound you want to be the loudest. And then sometimes you have to edit internally within a sound to shorten or lengthen the the positive or negative amplitude in the low end so that it fits better with whatever you're conforming it to. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, relative phase is not about placing everything on top of each other. It's just how it all sounds together. I typically like to have the polarity of things working in the same, even whether or not they're time aligned or not. I like them working in the same, you know, in the same, starting with a positive amplitude. I had a thought in the middle of what I was just saying, and it's already gone. Yeah, it's a very tricky thing to sort of work out, and you just sort of have to experiment with it. Gosh, I really wish I could think of that thought. Polarity and phase are different. They're related, but they are slightly different. Different in that you want things to be in agreement. Oh, I know what I was going to say. When I'm recording a drum kit, I kind of get the balance of sounds and kind of get a level going on everything. And I try to make decisions with the polarity by listening, but I will do a confirmation test by having the drummer just hit the kick drum, bam, bam, and then look at the sound of the kick drum in all of my tracks. Now, even though the room microphone is farther away from the kick drum, so the initiation of the sound for the kick drum is going to look like this. Most of the time, they should both be positive, right? So if I'm only having the drummer play the kick drum, then I can look at each track and see that the sound of the kick drum is starting as a positive. Because, you know, when someone starts playing a full drum kit and a snare, sometimes it's hard to see and differentiate that stuff visually. So that's a good visual aid. And, you know, sometimes depending on the way that the snare mic is placed, the very first, even though the kick drum, like you've got, this is the kick drum track and this is the snare track. And when you do the kick drum test, the kick drum appears in both to have positive amplitude. But when someone's playing the snare, depending on the snare drum mic placement, it's such an explosive thing that happens on the snare drum. Sometimes actually the capsule of the microphone is actually pulled towards the drum when it's struck because the head is depressed on the snare drum, and it kind of creates this little vacuum that pulls the diaphragm of the microphone closer to it before it releases into the positive amplitude, and that can be visually a little bit. It can throw you a little bit. So sometimes the beginning of a snare drum has a slight little negative dip before the loud positive amplitude. And that depends on placement of where that vacuum is happening. It happens typically more as the microphone is over the drum, sort of pointing into it. If it's off to the side like this, it's not as dramatic typically. So hopefully that nonsense helped explain it. It's polarity and phase is something you just really have to spend time training your ear with, and I would, yeah, I'd recommend just spending time going over the places in the course where I explained it and try to give a bit of detail and experimenting on your own. Yeah, and lining samples up, you've got to decide which one is the boss and make the others conform to it.
Awesome, thank you. We've got another technical question, so I'm going to read it word for word from David. The first is about the 200 to 600 frequency range in the general mix. He understands that mainly cleaning those frequencies give him more clarity in the mix, but sometimes he feels that the mix loses body and warmth. So any suggestion for those frequency ranges? And then on vocals in particular, he has problems around the 3000 and the 2K frequencies, like some whistles on the E syllables, and also in the 900 to 1.5K frequencies where he gets nasal textures. Do you have any recommendations for those frequencies?
Yeah, sure. First of all, yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of fact that, you know, I think you said it as, I think it was stated as 200 to 600.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, where I mean, the recording process, microphones and amplifiers, and I mean like signal amplifiers, which, you know, preamps, compressors, EQs. Acoustic energy is typically captured in a way where there's a lot of that stuff, because that's in the area of where most of the primary tones in music exist. You know, like when you're, you know, you know, middle A, it's 440, it's 440 cycles. That's where that's like, and you know, that's where a lot of the primary tones are in music. And then the way it happens in record making, we end up capturing an abundance of it. So yeah, we need to be, we end up carving a lot out in that area. Now, everything has to have a little bit of that in it to be connected. So you got to be careful not to overdo it, and realize where it's most important that things have those frequencies. You know, drums, like acoustic drums, are basically wooden boxes, and so that resonance has a lot of that quality. So we end up EQing a lot of that out. It needs some of it, but we need to turn the tide towards like the really solid low end and the mid range and upper frequencies where we have the articulation and we can really feel the rhythm. And then the low end is about the supporting the sound. And so we kind of need to carve that stuff out, because everything has quite a bit of it in it. It gets cloudy, but we don't want to eliminate it from everything. Guitars need a decent amount of it. Vocals need a decent amount of it. The bass instrument needs a decent amount of it. So I would say vocal would be the one thing where you don't want to EQ out too much of it. And maybe that we'll get to it, but maybe that's why you have so much difficulty with the upper mid-range and the 2 to 4K, because you've relieved too much of that in the vocal, and it doesn't, you know, because the thing is the sound of a voice for the upper frequencies in the sound of my recorded voice to sound balanced and not too forward. It needs to have a little bit of that chesty 300 tone in it. They need to be in equal measure. But if I'm taking out too much of the 300, 350 out of my voice, well, then it's going to just make the upper frequencies, the upper mid-range frequencies, stick out even more. So, you know, it's kind of like a balancing act. But it also goes into choosing the right microphone, the right microphone preamp, and all of the elements along the way to capture the voice, because the voice is one of the most difficult things to capture. And I always spend, which I mentioned in the course, I always spend time auditioning microphones. And once I find the most suitable microphone for someone's voice and their range, as it fits into the music, then I look for a preamp. And I just try to find the right sort of combination of elements that I can record the most balanced version of their voice, sonically as well as tonally, articulation, and kind of look at it that way. So while we do need to take out a lot of that 2 to 600 range, it's different for each instrument, and it's also different for production, different productions, different genres. Something has to live there. Something has to live there. The voice is important that it has a lot of that presence, because that's a very natural sounding range for the voice. So let's move on to the difficulties you're having with the upper mid-range in the voice. Maybe you are, I don't know, maybe you're, well, it's kind of, I'm having to assume some things here, but maybe you haven't chosen the right microphone, but that's regardless. You have a sound you're trying to get mixed, and you like the performance, and you want to add some brightness and articulation. Well, try adding it the octave above, so the octave above of 3K is 6K, and then the octave above of 6K is 12K, so it doubles. You know, an octave is either it's doubling or half. Like, you know, the lower octave of 1,000 cycles is 500 cycles, and so forth and so on. So maybe maybe for the brightness you want to EQ up above where you're having difficulty. You might need to use a de-esser. A de-esser is a compressor that works in very can work in very specific frequency bands. So it's like it's kind. You can use a multi-band compressor too to just when the 3K is a little too present in the voice. At the end of your signal chain, you can have a multi-band compressor that when those frequencies get over a certain level of loudness, that a very narrow band is going to kick in and turn them down. A de-esser works in a similar fashion. So sometimes that can be helpful. And down, there was one other, sometimes if you need frequencies need to mask a little bit and help in the presentation. Dan, there was one other question in that about specifics in that. Can you tell me what that was?
So he finds that to get vocals warm but with clarity at the same time, he's having problems in 3 to 2K, like whistles on the E syllables, and around 900 to 1.5K with nasal textures not being so warm.
Well, what it could be is that you are accentuating those frequencies too much on other instruments, and you're creating too much competitive sonic space for the vocal to speak. I mean, I don't know I have no idea what the genre of music is, but you know, if you've got acoustic guitars or electric guitars, they are very present in that range. And if you're accentuating those frequencies on those instruments, well, then you're kind of taking up that place for the voice to live, and then you're having to sort of push the voice to perform in those areas, and it can be unflattering. So it might be that you need to get things away from the voice and get some of those frequencies out of other things, so that the voice can live in that space. It's, you know, that it sort of really depends. It's program dependent. It's program dependent. Now, and I also don't know if this is on one particular project or recording that you're working with, or you experience this across many things. If you experience it across many things, then I would say that it's probably a little bit to do with your approach, and you can use some of the things that I've mentioned to try and rethink about how you're trying to get the vocal to fit in. And I recommend this for everyone. Don't mix all your music and get it sounding great and then put your vocal in. I've observed that that's a process that engineers do sometimes, and it doesn't work for me, because then I've filled up that space and then I haven't left room for the vocal. I think it's very important. I mean, I turn the vocal off sometimes, but I turn it off after I have an understanding of where I need to leave space for it, because everybody's voice and capture is different. I mean, the range they sing in, the texture of their voice. So I would say that it's probably also a consideration of the things that you are surrounding and supporting the vocal with, where you need to lessen their impact in those areas, so that you are not pushing the vocal to perform in those areas competitively in a way that's not flattering to the voice. Yeah, hopefully that helps. Dan, give me 1 second, because I have to switch over to my my earbuds.
No, well, we were going to wrap the call up anyway.
You still there?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Jacquire? Hello?
We there?
Yes, now we are.
Okay.
Can
Okay.
you hear
Cool.
me?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I can. Sorry about that.
No problem. I was going to say we're going to wrap the call up there anyway, because I know you've got a project you're working on today.
Okay.
And we have.
Okay. Do we have? Well, do we? I mean,
Do you want to continue?
yeah. For just a, I would like to, because that's all. Are those all the written questions, or were there some of those live questions?
That was a mixture of both.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You know what? I'll answer one or two more questions.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
The next question is from Jay, and it's that all of the production elements in the course are very cool, but sometimes they seem to appear out of nowhere in terms of some of the sounds that you use. How are they created? Do you just outsource the process of creating the program's parts?
Yeah. Sometimes. Yeah. Absolutely. Get another person's thought in there. Yeah, just the same as I would hire a musician. Outsource. It's some of it is outsourced, some of it's created in house. So yes, I mean, and it just sort of depends. I mean, there's so many sound libraries and so many. I mean, occasionally I've hired people that they have created their own personal sound libraries from found sounds or percussion instruments or their own instrumentation. So it's really like really like just hiring a musician to give you some creative input and stuff to play with. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Next question is, how should someone go about recording and mixing in a small square room that's say 10 foot by 10 foot? Any tips on that?
Well, make sure that the area is not too reflective. If you can, even some homemade sound treatment in there, even as simple as like tacking some blankets up on the wall. Just making sure that it's not a overly reflective place. Make sure that your speakers can be placed in an area where it sounds good. Listen to music that you're familiar with, that's not your music, like just an artist that you like, records that you like. Listen to it. Does it sound familiar? You got to move your speakers around a little bit, the width of them. I mean, you definitely want to try to create a triangle of listening, and that's something you can research online to sort of understand what I mean a little bit more clearly. But the distance that they are from a wall is important, to how far they're spaced. You just kind of have to play with those things and listen to music and get them optimized for wherever you can set them up, get them to be optimal. Don't just throw them there and expect it to sound good. You've got to work a little bit to understand how you can get them to be optimized the best, so that music that you're familiar with sounds familiar and relatable. And then another thing I would caution against is listening too loud, because the louder that you listen, the more that you activate the acoustic space that you're in. You're going to have to listen loud at times to have a sort of a reference of like how the impact in low end feels, but don't do it all the time. Get to understand how the room is going to react. Listen in different places in the room. I mean, obviously you want your sweet spot in your listening area to be balanced and informative, but go sit on the other side of the room and just kind of observe what good music or a good mix sounds like over there. Like, oh, well, okay, the low end over here feels a certain way, and kind of get familiar with that. Go out in the hallway, listen from a distance. And it's like, what translates really well. Sometimes that's a good way to tell how loud a vocal is. It balanced with everything else. Yeah, there's some advice.
Awesome. The next question is from James, and it's a career advice question. He says, I'm a solo artist writing and producing everything by myself at home. My goal is to tour and be heard through as many mainstream media platforms as possible. What would be the appropriate path for me to work towards, and what is the best approach to achieve that? And just in addition to that, what's the difference between an indie versus major label?
Well, the first one's easier to answer. A major label consists of something that's part of like Sony, Universal, Warner, like the big, long-standing. I mean, there's other sort of majors out there, but
but although record labels that, I mean, there's, you know, it's like Warner Brothers has Elektra and Atlantic and, you know, Reprise, Polydor. There's, you know, I think all those still fall under Warner Brothers, but, you know, and then there's Universal that has like Republic and Interscope and so on and so forth. Those are major labels. Independents are things like Dine Alone Records or Sub Pop or has a few examples trying to think of a couple in the UK, like Domino or that are not, they become kind of large, but they're funded independently. They are not part of those bigger corporations I've just defined. And then if you put your own record out, you're an independent label too. Basically, independent just means that you're not tied to one of the big corporations that are the major labels. Promoting or finding an audience. Well, you've got to go out and you've got to share your music with people. You're not going to just be able to create music on your own in your own, you know, sort of environment, bubble, I guess, and just expect that as soon as it gets out in the world and someone hears it, that you're going to fly to the top of, you know, of success. Sometimes that's really hard earned, and most of the time, well, not sometimes, almost all the time, it's very hard earned. And you have to share your music, and you have to get out and you have to perform. You have to build a fan base, and you have to become a promotion. You have to be in the business of promoting yourself, or find a partner that will help promote you. You have to play shows, and you have to become a strong performer, and someone that will attract a listening audience. You know, I make records. I understand how all that works, and I've seen it work, and I have thoughts on it, but that's not really my place of expertise in terms of specific resources. I have a lot of relationships, but it's not really what I do. You really just have to first of all, you have to create a great product, and then you have to share it with people. And if it really is great and it connects with people, then you will build a following. And the better it is, and the better that the opportunities you can find and happen into, hopefully the faster your success will grow. But even some of the best artists in history are not very popular or very well known. So the odds are long, and you really have to be prepared to do the work, and share the music, and put yourself with like-minded people. Go on tour, play shows with others, share your music with people that have similar music, that have a bit of profile, and just kind of connect yourself and put yourself out there. You know, hope that helps. And I hope you're successful, and I hope that all of you are successful in this pursuit. And it really just takes a lot of effort, and just really sticking with it. I've become very successful, but you know, for 10, 15 years, I was pretty much just a hardworking unknown, and just slowly built a community around myself, and did the work that slowly just built and built and built to a point where, you know, the word of mouth and the profile just kind of got to a place where it has gotten to now. But I still have to, but it doesn't mean that I don't sit around just, you know, cashing checks on those opportunities, and just, I still have to work hard, and I really try and apply myself, to challenge myself, to continue to create opportunities, and to warrant and justify and actively stay at the level that I'm at. So yeah, it just takes a long time and a lot of effort. And I hope that everybody can be successful at attaining some reward for the effort and the dreams that we all have.
Awesome. We'll take two more questions and then we'll wrap up there.
That sounds
By the way,
great.
everyone, if your question wasn't answered today, we are going to have a second question and answer call on Saturday, September the 14th at the same time. So I will make sure that you'll receive an email where you can post your questions, and we'll prioritize the questions from you guys who didn't get them answered today. So the final two questions. First one is from Ryan. And Ryan asks, sometimes I get wrapped up in trying to keep my songs within a 4-minute maximum arrangement. I've heard ideally you don't need to get to the chorus, or you should get to the chorus in the first 45 seconds. I find this very difficult as I play metal mostly and love a good intro. I feel like sometimes rushing to the chorus is not letting me develop my idea fully. Do you have any advice for this?
Well, those are good general rules. I don't know that the metal genre, I don't know that the metal genre that it totally applies to that. I mean, if the thing is if you have a really engaging introduction to the song, and you're not asking the listener to be too patient to get to, the riffs and hooks in the song and the energy of the overall song and kind of like draw them in, then there's no rules. I mean, there's no rules about that. Yes, it's something to pay attention to if you want to try to fit into more formulaic avenues of consumption, like the radio or Spotify or so forth and so on. But I think especially in metal music and things that fall outside of, and not that it's lesser than, I love a good metal jam, but all those rules are important in terms of a frame of reference. They do not apply to all genres. And if you've got a great 6-minute song, then it's just a great 6-minute song. And as long as it's a great 6-minute listen, and that you're not asking the listener to be overly patient with the development of the song in the beginning and kind of hook them in and make them want to go on the 6-minute journey, then you're all good. As long as your introduction, if you're someone that loves a good introduction, just make sure that it's an engaging one, and that you're really setting the stage for the song. I mean, I mix and produce songs often that are over the 4-minute mark, but it also depends on the genre and kind of what you're going for, and how many sections are in the song, and how much interest you can create, and how much development you can create over the course of the structure of the song, and how the arrangement unfolds. Typically the 3:30, 3:45 is a good rule of thumb, but and there's also nothing wrong with a 2-minute song. If you say everything and it feels like a full journey and it's a complete journey, and it's been engaging, it makes you want to listen to it again, that's okay too. So hopefully that helps.
Awesome. And the final question is from Augustine, and his question is, when mixing songs on the same album, do you use the same in the box mix bus processing for the entire album? And related to that, is there a mix template in the box that you always tend to use as a starting point?
The first answer is yes, primarily. It's and then it's so the mix bus that I create for an album project is pretty much the same mix bus process that I would apply across all the songs and mixes in the album. Now, that's not to say that they're all exactly the same. There's a little bit of fine tuning that happens sometimes, not always. But so the answer to that is yes, and that's the way I approach it. I have several different mix templates, and sometimes I have a very basic one that I can just kind of pull up, but I never really quite use the same exact template. It's a starting point, and sometimes I will create a template from a previous record that I've made that I think will be a good starting point for the next project that I'm going to do. And so I just kind of like it gives me like a head start. I don't use it exactly because they're not exactly the same thing, and I may not feel the same way about them, but I pull from it to kind of give myself a jumping off point. It's very, for me personally, obviously I have a bit of a method and the way that I like to do things, but I don't strictly stick to any particular process, and each record dictates a slightly different approach because of the way it sounds and what it needs, and it feels like what I need to give it. You know, I have the luxury of having a console over there behind me. Sometimes it's great to stem a song out and mix it on that as my summing box. Sometimes I use some of my analog stereo bus processing in conjunction with the console. Sometimes I use the console and I use the mix bus processing that's completely in the box. Sometimes I'll mix completely in the box and use some of my analog gear as part of the stereo bus treatment. Sometimes it's completely in the box. When I hang up with you, the song that I'm going to mix today is completely in the box, and it's because I've spent the time to get to know the song, experiment with these different possibilities, and make the choice that is going to be the sonically the best way to work. You know, if the desk version is not going to be exactly the same, but if it's close in result to what the in the box version is going to be, but I know that I'm going to have to mix this song today, and then I'm recording an album all week, and we're using the desk, and then I've got to come back to the mix next week, probably choose to work in the box, because the desk does not, because the desk and the in the box version were kind of neck and neck, a little bit different, but you know, it's not worth all of the time and energy it's going to take to go back and forth between the two projects. If the desk was the clear winner, well, then I do the work to go back and forth between the two projects. So it, you know, I curate the mix bus, or the mix template per project. I have a framework in which I start with, because you know, I want to have certain effects and methods of routing and options available. Typically, also my mix template is larger. My basic starter one is larger. There's more options in it than I will use, but I pull it all in, and then I kind of see what things, you know. Sometimes I have a widening bus for the instruments if I feel like that to get the most out of the recording in a mix, I need to sort of send it to a widening bus. Sometimes I don't use it. Sometimes I use a tape emulation on the stereo bus processing. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I use Pro L2 as my limiter. Sometimes I use the Oxford inflator. Really just depends on how I feel like what tools I need to pair together to get to the result. But I have a starter template, and that works for me. Others basically have one template, and they just get everything to kind of move through that, and that's the way they do it. You need to sort of figure out what's going to be best for you. I'm a little bit more boutique, I guess, in that I like to curate and do the work to make something a little bit more specific to the project that I'm working on. Appreciate all these great questions. Sorry if I didn't get to your question today. As Dan said, they will go through that stuff, and they will prioritize some of these questions that are very good questions that were left unanswered today. Again, I'm very thankful to have you here, and that you've taken up the course, and yeah, sincerely hope that you're getting a lot out of it. Technical stuff, but thinking stuff and is more important. I would never ask you to strictly subscribe to my method of work. I just want to share my experience so that it can give you a platform to feel confident and comfortable in, and think from, and become your own creator in your own style. I wish you the best, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Jacquire, and thank you everyone who attended. We will post a recording of this call up in the next few days, and it will be timestamped, so you can skip to the questions you want to hear. And there will be, as I said, a second call on Saturday, September the 14th at the same time, which is 12 p.m. Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific. And we'll send you all an email a week before that call so you can register for it and also ask your questions there again as well. Thank you all for attending. And thank you, Jacquire.
Thanks, Dan. I'll see you all later.